Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for making it to 2600. We've got quite a sizable room here, probably about 20 plus people or so. That's really good numbers for us. And today we've got a fun little presentation about analyzing Putin's minions. So this is kind of an interesting one because it's about a Bulgarian spy ring who actually decided to name themselves that. And you'll see some sort of fun things about that. So who are Putin's minions? Basically, it was a group of Bulgarians who were based in the UK in different parts of London, and they also had a base in Great Yarmouth. And they kind of had been active for quite a while until the police and MI5 and counterterrorism and all that basically uncovered them and arrested them. The interesting thing is that they had been conducting these operations for a number of months and years, targeting kind of dissidents and journalists and investigators who are kind of critical of the regime and Putin and all this kind of stuff. And the other interesting thing about them is that they're doing things on behalf of Russia, but they're not Russian nationals, right? They're actually Bulgarian citizens. And we'll dive into a little bit more about that connection and how these random guys from Bulgaria ended up being part of spying on behalf of Russia. It's kind of an interesting link and connection. So the fun thing about this operation was that we actually got to see their kind of base, which was this hotel called the Haiti in Great Yarmouth, of all places. So it's kind of a random place to have a spy base, I guess. You wouldn't really suspect one to be there. So that's probably why they put it there potentially. And I think if you go on to TripAdvisor, there's quite a funny review there that's something like, it was after the arrests were made, but it was something like, the soundproofing was very good, and there's a diverse and international crowd, and there's a lot of like interference with the electronics and TV and stuff. So they're kind of alluding to the fact that there's these guys with all this spying and hacking equipment all just piled up in boxes and stuff in their hotel kind of place, and then they would use that to go and spy on people, travel around Europe, and then kind of come back to here. This was their kind of European base of operations. Pretty interesting stuff, and we got to see inside it. And of course, they actually had a couple of minions in the back there, which was quite funny. The other part is that there was kind of 6 main people, but it was actually kind of a more expanded network than that you'll see later. But there were 6 main people based in the UK. There was 4 guys and 2 girls. And the other interesting thing was that one of the guys was actually in a relationship with both of the girls. So it was kind of like you'll see how it works, how the sort of group dynamics work here. But these are the main characters of the story, or Putin's minions. And then there was also the mastermind behind the minions, which is an Austrian guy called Jan Marsalek. And he's an unusual character because he was actually the former COO of Wirecard, which is a financial payment processing company from Germany that went bust, and he ran off with like nearly 2 billion euros. Pretty wild case, wild story. And he's actually the guy who was in charge of the minions. He was the one who was contacting them over Telegram and ordering them and giving them instructions on things to go after, giving them targets to go after. So who were the targets of the minions? So the targets of the minions were kind of Russian dissidents. You have investigative journalist from Bellingcat, Christo Grozev, which some of you may have heard of. He now works at the Insider magazine. Just to shout out, worth looking at these publications. These are really good sources of news and information about what's going on with Russia, their operations abroad. And then there was other people part of the magazine, like dissident and critical magazines, investigative journalists, the Austrian state security, probably, traditional target. You would expect these kinds of people to be attacked and spied on by, foreign intelligence. There's nothing too surprising here. Former politicians, former officials, and Ukrainian servicemen, army officers, and things, training and being based in Germany as well. So not too surprising, but interesting because they're Bulgarian and not Russian. So maybe there's difficult to understand what the relationship there. Why are Bulgarians? Is the Bulgarian intelligence service spying on them? No, we later learn they are basically proxies. And here's a map by the BBC that put out like the different places that they would go. So they would start in London. They had a base in Great Yarmouth, and they would target places. They would go to Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, Montenegro, Valencia, which is where basically some of these dissidents and former officials and people like that were based. There was it was quite a detailed breakdown of how they targeted Christo Grozev. They actually used multiple members of the group would target him in different ways. So you had some of them using video surveillance. So they would have like a camera based outside of his apartment in Vienna, and they would film the entrance. They had someone sat next to him on the plane, and they were filming it on their phone. They had someone trying to message him on Instagram, basically trying to honey trap him, one of the women, trying to sort of lure him into some sort of relationship, get him to like her pictures and stuff, all that kind of way of approaching people. And there was also a conversation between the leader, Orlin Rusev, who was trying to talk to Jan Marsalek about kidnapping and torturing this guy and taking him back to Russia because he's such like a thorn in the side of the Russian government, basically. And then there was also people who they had actually insiders, employees who worked at airlines who knew about flight tickets and stuff. So every ticket he bought, they knew like what plane he was on and where he was sat. That's how they were able to sit next to him and film him with their phone. It's pretty scary stuff. The main reasons that they were coming after Christo was because he had uncovered the links between the GRU operatives who managed to poison Sergei Skripal in Salisbury in 2018. And then also they managed to uncover the links between the FSB kind of assassination unit against Alexei Navalny as well, the former Russian political party leader. So Christo has uncovered all these things and exposed and brought these things to light. And without him, we may have never have known about these operations. So a massive asset to the rest of us and people interested in what Russia is actually doing, how they do it. Again, I kind of ran through some of these already, but there's a picture of Christo on the plane, Orlin talking about kidnapping him, and then the phone outside of his apartment. So the hideout of the minions, where did they do these operations, and what was in that hideout? This is where it got interesting. So we saw the picture of Orlin Rusov's office, and in the office we saw he had like a tab open with A, Telegram, and B, a website looking at cell phone data recovery stuff. So obviously he's thinking about how can they steal phones, how can they go through it, with maybe it's a piece of software, or maybe it's a technique, all these different ways that you can kind of grab messages off of something and use that to maybe find out who their contacts are, who they're talking to, who their family members are, whatever that spies and hit squads will try and do. And then this is probably one of the biggest keys of the puzzle was the Telegram messages. This is clear evidence that when law enforcement raided their hideout, they had access to all of his messages. So they're able to basically download all of this. This was like an absolute gold mine for counterintelligence to figure out what was actually going on, who were they talking to, and who was running the whole thing. So yeah, massive kudos to law enforcement for figuring this out, and pretty interesting of them to share this as well publicly. So the Telegram messages that were seized, we had I think it was 80,000, 78,000 messages between him and the rest of his group, so you could understand where the tasks were coming from and how he was tasking the others to do things. Really interesting stuff. So it went from August 2020 to February 2023, so nearly 2.5 years of spying on people, trying to kidnap people, trying to do the dirty work of the Russian government, basically. This is some of the other stuff found inside of the hideout. So we had a minion camera, which I don't even know how they were going to use that. Maybe on a train or something. I don't know. Or maybe they just did it for fun. They were like, we are the minions. Let's make a spy minion. I don't know. Sort of thing that these kind of people would do. But other interesting ones was a spy camera inside of a Coke bottle, which is quite interesting because Coca-Cola is quite dark liquid. So if you put a camera in there, you wouldn't really know that there was something inside the bottle. And then we had spy glasses as well. And I mean, they're not the greatest with their operational security because they took a picture of themselves in the mirror wearing the spy glasses. So this is the kind of people we were dealing with, really. They did have a lot of drones. They did use drones for a lot of things. They were using it to kind of interfere with people. They almost were trying to start a protest outside the Kazakhstan embassy by dropping like goat's blood or something outside the front door of the embassy. Not entirely sure what that was really going to achieve, but some people theorized that they were basically running sort of interference campaigns with countries and states that are in the sort of Commonwealth of Independent States. So all the ex-Soviet Union countries, they're basically trying to destabilize some of these things and act as if the Russian government's going to come in and swoop and save them from all these anti-government protests, which they had manufactured themselves. Pretty interesting stuff. And then also we had a bunch of fake IDs. So we see some here, sort of the probably a little bit blurry to make out, but it says the Discovery Channel down there. And then also, I think it was National Geographic as well. So they had all these fake press passes, and there was another one for the United Nations as well. So they used these to basically get into places. It could be some sort of press conference, because remember, they're going after journalists at the end of the day, and some of these investigative journalists give talks at conferences, and they would use these things to go there as well. So, if you're running a conference, think about the malicious people who will pretend to be someone else and try and get in there as well. Um, shout out to B-Sides Bournemouth. Other things that they would do is they had undercover uniform or cover uniforms. So people that you expect them to sort of be coming and going inside of buildings, office blocks, maybe. So Deliveroo and DHL uniforms, no one really suspects anything malicious about someone with a Deliveroo uniform walking in to a corporate office, right? So that's precisely why they would wear that. And that's the sort of stuff they would find inside of the hideout. So this is where it gets interesting, the spying devices of the minions. I'm not going to go kind of like a deep breakdown of each one, but just give you an idea of what a sort of arsenal of these types of groups and units are using. And in the bottom corner, we have Dr. Nefario, which if you've ever watched the Minion films, he's kind of the guy that makes all the spying tools, and he'll make things like, I don't know, like a fart gun or something like that. That's the kind of stuff that the real Minions were thinking about as well, I think. So we have an IMSI capture, which is a kind of a traditional law enforcement, lawful interception or lawful interference tool that's used to basically gather the phone numbers of people in the local vicinity, or kind of impersonate a cell tower in some ways and get phones to connect to it. That's pretty much how that works. You can kind of figure out why they would want to do that to get the phone number of someone. Hack5, yeah, they had all sorts of Hack5 gear. So Hack5 is a organization that basically produces hacking tools. They are sort of like a company, so anyone can go and buy this stuff. But you have things like the Wi-Fi pineapple, the Wi-Fi coconut, the land turtle, and the packet squirrel. These are just things that red teamers, people who are sort of ethical penetration testers, they do it for companies. They will kind of buy these things and they will use them against companies to kind of prove their security and test their physical security defenses or their network security defenses with their Wi-Fi networks. But this crew was using them to basically go after people's devices, go after their phones, laptops, whatever it is, and get them to connect to them and basically intercept their networking traffic and try and spy on what they're accessing, because it could be useful to know what websites they're using. Maybe you could potentially steal some credentials of theirs and access their email accounts, all sorts of things you can possibly imagine that a hacking group may want to use them for. Just a little diagram of how some of these devices work. Pretty straightforward. It will kind of create like a Wi-Fi router. So, the Goat and Tricycle has its own, Wi-Fi hub, and you will connect to it. And then when you're connecting to it, you're, passing your traffic through that device to the rest of the internet. They have these rogue devices, which also maybe there'll be like a Goat and Tricycle free Wi-Fi. And if you connect to that, it's actually a malicious one that is capturing your traffic and decrypting, HTTPS or something, and mandel in the middling that connection. So basically, it's something to be careful of if you're using Wi-Fi, especially if you go to somewhere like a cybersecurity conference where you have people with these devices trying to troll each other and do all sorts of nefarious stuff. Hack5 removable tools. This one was pretty interesting because you have to get pretty kind of up close and personal with someone to be able to use these tools effectively. It's not known to what degree or to what extent that these tools were used against their targets, but just interesting to look at what they actually had. So they had Bash Bunny, they had a rubber ducky, a plunderbug, land tap, and a keylogger. Most of these do similar things. You'll plug it into the device. You can run commands remotely and get it to download some sort of payload from the internet, or it will execute some sort of other malware to exfiltrate data from that device, or could just be keylogging the keystrokes as well. So not overly complicated for this crowd to understand, but still interesting that these espionage operatives and proxies for the Russian government had these things. Key cloning is another one. They didn't say that they had a flipper zero, but I've shown one on the screen, as well as another one called a hack key. But the purpose of these, they said that they had devices that they can be used to clone hotel room access key cards. So you can imagine if you're trailing someone or following someone, they have a hotel room, and they go out for the day, and you just want to go into that hotel room and bug their device, their laptop, whatever it is. These are the kinds of devices you can use to clone those access keys and get into them. They also had another ability to do car key cloning, which is similar to hotel room keys as well. Like you basically capture the frequency that they use to interact with the other side of the thing. So you have the access card and the lock. They'll just capture that, and then they can just replay it. I mean, there's a lot more sophisticated technology going on there. But it's fundamentally that is the goal that's why they want to do it. And again, if they can get into your car, they could put a tracker in there, they could put a listening device in there, all sorts of things you can probably imagine. So why does the Russian government rely on the minions? So the interesting thing is, if you have like this group of proxy operators, then they're kind of expendable. These guys literally got caught. They got arrested by the UK police. So they're not the greatest spies in the world, right? And that's exactly why they kind of, it's okay to use them in the eyes of the Russian government, because it doesn't really matter if they are caught or not. They're pretty much probably, that from the Telegram messages, we'd learned that they were literally just being paid to do this. So they're kind of a mercenary group at the end of the day. There was no diplomatic risks. So sometimes when spies, like spies for the FSB or GRU or SVR, if they get caught, then it becomes a big diplomatic issue between like the US and Russia, or the UK and Russia and whoever. And now all the ambassadors and things can be, or the diplomats can be expelled back to Russia, basically resets their operations, they've lost their access. Whereas if these guys get arrested, none of that happens. So that's the benefit of using these guys. And again, plausible deniability. They could say, these aren't Russian citizens, these aren't Russian nationals, they're nothing to do with us. They were just being paid by someone, we don't know who. That's pretty much why they use these guys. Again, and the leader of the minions, the ultimate evil mind behind it all was this guy, Jan Marsalek. And he, again, is another middleman. He's another go-between between being able to attribute something to the Russian government and to the minions themselves. So he had the funds, he had the ability, just stole $2 billion or 2 billion euros through Wirecard. So all those funds can be used to fund all sorts of operations and things you can possibly imagine. And then ultimately, there's the benefactors of the operations, which is the Russian government. You have Putin and his allies and the other intelligence agencies, and they can gather some of that stuff and figure out if they want to use it, for other types of operations as well. There are well-known GRU and FSB assassination squads, which Christo Grozev has kind of brought to light and shown the world. And maybe some of the things that the minions collect is then passed on to these assassination groups, potentially, right? A lot of the time, we do like sort of cybersecurity talks, so I want to link this back to some of the sort of recent historical hacking campaigns, but linked to the Russian government. So there was a few in 2016 and 2017. We saw close access operations against WADA and USADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Organization, the US Anti-Doping Organization. So this is around the time that Russia was being investigated with their athletes for doping, for blood doping, and taking drugs and performance-enhancing drugs to cheat in the Olympics, pretty much, is the narrative. And so they were kind of trying to find dirt on the US and trying to level the playing field and be like, well, you guys are cheating as well, so you guys have to be banned as well, that kind of thing. And we also saw them targeting the investigation in Malaysia related to the MH17 takedown, which was basically a passenger jet shot over Ukraine, and Russia completely denied it was them. They said it was Ukrainian rebels that shot it down. But then they went and they go and basically in person and try and hack into the Wi-Fi of the investigators, the building of where the investigation is being done. It's pretty guilty actions, guilty activities to me. And we also saw the Office of, I can't remember what the P stands for, but it's due to the chemical warfare, chemical weapons at The Hague, which is where these things get investigated. There was this was basically when there was a claim of sarin gas attacks in Syria, and Syria is obviously a great ally of Russia, and Bashar al-Assad, who recently abdicated and flew to Russia. Basically they're doing helping out their ally there. And then again in 2020 we have these. This is when the Minion campaign kind of started. So we can kind of see how it's evolved over time. So a lot of these campaigns were by GRU operatives going in person, and now it's changed basically to using proxy groups because they kept getting caught essentially. And now they don't care if they get caught because it's not as big of a deal for them. Other notable Russian hacktivist campaigns on Telegram. So Telegram, as we all know, it's kind of a Russian-developed, Russian-owned messaging service by, what's his name, Pavel Durov. And a lot of these groups are allowed to, launch DDoS attacks and claim their victims and show off who they have victimized and websites they've taken down. They're hitting companies, they're downloading data from it, they're uploading it to Telegram and manufacturing all these leaks and things. They're just allowed to operate openly, basically, on Telegram. But through the research and intelligence gathering by sort of Western instant response companies and Eastern European instant response companies as well, they have basically managed to link some of these hacktivist groups back to the GRU and the FSB and things. Some notable ones is Free Civilian, which was a hacktivist group that used to post leaks to English-speaking cybercrime forums. They posted a load of Ukrainian data that are stolen from Ukrainian government agencies, and then they would, pretend that it was, the anti-government or something like that. But they just linked it back to a kind of a new GRU unit posing as a cyber criminal. Interesting stuff, but again, it comes back to this idea of using proxies, using fake identities to achieve the kind of espionage goals and state-sponsored hacking campaigns that what they're trying to do. And other notable Russian espionage campaigns, you have the targeting of people and the targeting of entities. So over the last kind of couple of years, so ever since the kind of Ukraine war has kicked off, there's been a lot of Russian sabotage and destructive operations going on in sort of mainland Europe and in the UK as well. We've seen, unfortunately, the video is covering the thing, but we've seen basically Russia is hiring people on Telegram. No, it's all right. It's all right, Adam. No worries. We saw Russian espionage basically hiring criminals via Telegram to go and burn things down and do arson attacks. So they're literally hiring criminals on Telegram, paying them a bit of crypto, giving them instructions of what to burn down. They burn it down and then they pay them. And this is what they've done several times now. There's also been a group basically of Polish sort of spy ring in Poland who was monitoring the trains and transport systems going from the Polish railway networks, targeting the link into Ukraine, basically the NATO resupply hubs. And you had all these Belarusians, Russians, and kind of defecting Polish citizens who are supporting these. They were kind of monitoring them and reporting back what they were seeing. And then we saw the explosive packages and delivery planes, things like DHL and other couriers had actually unusual devices that would be set to explode and catch fire while the flight was taking place, so the plane would have to emergency land. I don't think this was with the intention of destroying or blowing up the plane. There has not been any cases of that, as far as I know. But again, it's a sabotage, it's an influence operation at the end of the day. They're trying to cause chaos and spread fear. And then there's the targeting of people. So you have the dissidents, you have your Navalny's, you have your Skripals, which is your defectors, And then you have Grozef, which is your investigative journalist. These are three types of people they're going after. Other things to consider are the Russian intelligence leaks. So we have sort of contracting companies that have had the files and data inside of their networks leaked to the public. So some of these are actually you can find somewhere. So we had NTC Vulcan, which would develop hacking tools and disinformation campaigns on behalf for the SVR and the GRU, as well as the FSB. And they're kind of famous for working with well-known APT groups that sort of private cybersecurity vendors track, known as Sandworm and APT29 or Cozy Bear. SciTech was another interesting one, had about 7.5 terabytes of data leaks. And that kind of proved that the Russian FSB had been developing kind of DDoS tools and disinformation campaign tools as well. Some of them are really, really interesting stuff that pretty much we would never see shared to sites, like VirusTotal or whatever, because it's very closely kept and guarded, but still used against sort of places in sort of the CIS, the ex-Soviet countries as well. And then Social Design Agency, really recently, actually, September 2024, we had all of their documents about them, how they create propaganda campaigns, what agencies, what marketing and distribution techniques they use. So there's a lot of really detailed information about how a particular campaign known as Doppelganger was operating. So they would create fake news sites, they would host pages, and then they would basically spread that around using sort of Telegram and Twitter and all sorts of things as well. So again, really interesting examples of how they achieve their operations. So why should anyone care about this? Basically, if you have any sort of tangential relation to Russia or your organization is competing with Russian companies, you have to be wary of this, right? You have to be understand what the capabilities of your adversaries are to be able to understand how to defend against them. And especially if you're some sort of political movement that's anti-Russian, or it's a sort of charity or media, or you're a journalist, if you do publish things out there, they are going to look into you and they are going to figure out, is this worth us, taking some sort of action against it to shut it down? Is it easy for them to shut it down? If it's easy for them to shut it down and they have the capability, then they may act on it, right? So defense against the minions, it's again, if you're being targeted by these types of people, it's pretty hard to stop everything. But there are certain things you can do to prevent these things as well. You can be kind of aware of the fact that your Wi-Fi could be monitored, so it could have sort of deep packet inspection of those connections. So maybe not do the most sensitive things over Wi-Fi. Maybe save that for a wired connection at home. There's some certain practices and steps you could take to avoid being spied upon. Physical security, it's a good idea to have CCTV. If you're a company and you can afford physical pen testing, it is good to understand like how easy it would be to get in, and that would inform your decision making as well. Again, security awareness, coming to things like this and learning about what's out there is also key to staying informed and staying protected. Some other examples, I'm not going to list them all off, but I think many of us are doing it here. But at the end of the day, it comes down to threat modeling. And are you the type of person or type of organization that could be targeted by this type of adversary, which is a very high-end, highly targeted adversary? Still interesting to learn about, but if you're not likely to be targeted to them, then maybe it's just a fascinating, interesting thing to learn about, right? And list of references for where I came across all this stuff. The BBC's done an amazing breakdown of all these investigations. These guys were arrested in the UK, so they were able to get a lot of it. There was a very open court case, and all the evidence was presented there, which you can go through yourselves, like I did. But I've kind of done it all for you, so and that's pretty much it. Thanks very much. Yeah, do you want to click?